Our adaptation is from the 1946 movie from David Lean, and it shows how the convict Abel Magwitch was a product of a corrupt justice system.
Our thesis statement is David Lean's movie Great Expectations, 1946, is successful in portraying Abel Magwitch as a stereotypical convict through Magwitch's appearance. However, Charles Dickens' Great Expectation does a far better job at demonstrating how Magwitch was destined to be a product of a corrupt justice system by highlighting his backstory as a lonely orphan.
Orphans in the Victorian era having to resort to crime. Being an orphan in the Victorian era was not a very easy task, harder than today. Orphans were on the rise in the Victorian era due to an increase of disease, leaving many children without parents. With the influx of orphans and the orphanages being overcrowded, this led to some of the children and teenagers committing to a life of crime in order to survive. The alternative to a life of crime was attempting to find a workhouse. As shown in the bottom picture, workhouses were crowded environments where both children and adults alike did hard labor in exchange for necessities. These workhouses had very less than favorable conditions to live in, making the orphans who lived in them resort back to crime in order to survive. How the justice system was corrupt, what happened when you committed a crime. The Victorians were not very lenient people when it came to punishing those who committed serious crimes. If you committed crimes such as murder, kidnapping, treason, or rape, there was very little to no chance of you surviving. While yes, these crimes are awful and deserve to be punished severely, everyone should have the right to a fair trial and should not be put to death instantly. Another point that was very unfair was the separation of between classes. If a poor person committed a crime of any degree, they would be punished significantly more and stand even less of a chance of freedom compared to someone who was of a higher social class than them. Prisoners had essentially zero rights, and officers could do whatever they wanted to them. They could beat them and treat them harshly, and no one would dare go against an officer. From an early age, children were taught to respect those with authority. If they did not obey, they were punished severely.
This is the common look of a criminal. Thieves are notable for having small, wandering eyes, thick and closed eyebrows, distorted or squashed noses, thin beards and hair, sloping foreheads, and deformities and scars. And then in the Victorian era, it was believed that certain people were meant to be criminals by just the way they look. And as you can see, this is the way a common criminal looks.
Finlay Curry, Academy Award-winning actor, was cast as Abel Magwitch in the 1946 film adaptation of Great Expectations. He was appropriately tough in his depiction of the convict, especially in his ill-tempered manner, demonstrating to the audience the hard life that the man has lived. Even later in the movie, he still carries the right roughness around the edges to still show that Magwitch could never quite lose his criminal past completely.
Magwitch is depict how Magwitch is depicted in the Great Expectations movie. Based on how Magwitch is depicted in the movie, Magwitch looks like someone who was born to be a common thief. Compared to Pip and Herbert, Magwitch looks nothing like a gentleman, is not an ideal looking man. Magwitch has a crooked nose, missing eye, nappy and thin, unkept hair.
I think you should know that I communicated with Abel Magwitch in New South Wales and reminded him that if ever he should present himself in this country, it would be an act of felony, rendering himself liable to the extreme penalty of the law. Take a look out of that window, Jim. That sort of thing happens every day. Magwitch has enemies here who would not hesitate to inform on him.
I see.
But he has guided himself by my caution, no doubt.
How Magwitch is conveyed as a product of the corrupt justice system in the movie. The character of Abel Magwitch was not portrayed the same in the movie as compared to the book. The movie also goes into little to no detail about Magwitch's early life and how he was an orphan essentially destined for the life of crime. Lastly, Magwitch did not have enough time in the movie. His character was not developed enough, unfortunately. He played a very important role in both Pip's life, both indirectly and directly. His character was portrayed very poorly.
The novel portrays Magwitch as a product of a corrupt justice system differently by including a chapter where Magwitch is given an opportunity to share his background story. The movie demonstrates Magwitch as a criminal through his appearance, while the novel introduces the idea that Magwitch was destined to be a criminal by the time he was neglected as a child. The quote on this slide is Magwitch confessing to Pip and Herbert that they, the system, were too busy measuring his head, following the idea of looking like a criminal in the movie, but continues to add that they should have measured his stomach instead, illustrating to the audience that he was a starving child and had to steal food because he was left no other choice.
When discussing how the novel portrays corruption of the Victorian justice system in contrast to the book, a prime example to use is the story of Abel Magwitch. The first quote displays how he lived his life, in and out of jail, but this was not because he was a bad person. He was a product of a corrupt justice system. When discussing the story of his early life with Pip, Magwitch tells him he lived in Essex, where he would steal to survive. He also mentions a man that left him cold and weary. As readers, we can presume this meant his father leaving him homeless on the streets and parentless. In this next quote, Magwitch discusses how people looked at him and seen a devil in him. But he was just trying to survive. If he did not steal, he did not eat. He did not have the resources or direction that others had to get a job and have a normal life. Lastly, in this quotation, Magwitch describes how his destiny was predetermined by other people. He was destined to spend his life in jail because that is the potential everyone's seen in him. He was not looked upon and told he would be an enormous success one day, nor did anyone have great expectations for his future. He was looked at and people told him he would spend the rest of his life in jail. This is not fair and is a good example of the corrupt justice system and society the novel depicts. To show the effects of a corrupt justice system, let us look at Pip and Magwitch. Both Pip and Magwitch were orphaned early on in life. Pip had his sister and Joe Gardry to raise him, while Magwitch grew up as a gayman and did not have another family he could rely on, and instead had to resort to crime to support himself. Pip is given the opportunity to be a recipient of a large fortune and made into a gentleman. Magwitch, on the other hand, got through life thieving and fighting just to fill his stomach. Both characters started in the same position, orphaned and poor. One ended up living a luxurious lifestyle in London, and one lived a life of crime. This shows how two people in the Victorian era could have the same starting point, but one can be deemed as a criminal just because he was put in a tough situation. This shows how the book highlights the topic of corruption more frequently than the movie. In contrast to Magwitch's backstory of a homeless orphan thieving to fill his stomach, Compeyson grew up with a good education. Compeyson was attractive and his manners gentlemanly and smooth. Magwitch was the complete opposite. Here's where the comparison comes in. Compeyson made his life through forgery and financial schemes. Little to no criminal record. But Magwitch had a large record of arrests. One day, Compeyson involved Magwitch in a counterfeiting scheme. Both were arrested, but Compeyson arranged his story so that most evidence of criminality fell to Magwitch, even though Compeyson had set up and run the whole scheme. At their trial, Compeyson insisted on separate defense, so his own lawyer could play up the contrast between the two men. Compeyson's gentleman appearance did not free him of prison time, but the judge and jury looked upon him more favorably, solely due to his social level compared to Magwitch, a boy with no parents, brought up by chance among lower class people, and always hungry. Clearly a prime example of a corrupt justice system during the Victorian era displayed in the novel.
Great Expectations 1946 movie suggests that Magwitch was a product of a corrupt justice system because he was a born criminal based on his physical traits. Magwitch was not a gentleman, which made him a stranger in a system that supported those that looked and acted like they were part of high-class society living. So he was destined to be a potential criminal living in and out of jail. In the novel by Charles Dickens, Dickens highlights that young people are criminalized from an early age, which is different from the movie that suggests Magwitch was a criminal based on his deceitful impression. As Jaggers describes in the quote, he has seen orphan children tried as criminals with no other option or guidance and then placed in the corrupt system that treats and abuses them, ultimately leaving these orphan children to be hung by the neck or continue life as guilty convicts falling in and out of a poorly designed system that could have prevented a boy, like Magwitch, from being a convict by providing another option than leaving. Although the Great Expectations 1946 movie gives Magwitch notable features that depict himself as an untrusting, dangerous thief, Magwitch's appearance is not only what made him destined to a life of being in and out of jail. Orphans were overlooked by the justice system until they were charged with a crime. In Charles Dickens' novel, Great Expectations, Dickens offers an alternative point of view that portrays Magwitch as a person rooted in a life of crime because he was neglected and poverty stricken. Magwitch was not a gentleman and never received a proper education, which made it difficult to grow up as a man and earn and participate in an honest way of living. Magwitch was born into a system that criminalized the young with limited options rather than tending to them, eventually setting the rest of Magwitch's life to an endless amount of destruction.